today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Earlier today, it was announced Skye Nicholson will be making her first defense of her newly obtained WBC title. Skye Nicholson herself took to her social media and stated, "First world title defense locked in against a strong power puncher on this great card in Philadelphia. It's my 11th pro fight, but I truly believe I am the best featherweight in the world, and I look forward to making a statement on July 13th in the USA, live on DAZN on the undercard of Jaron Ennis's first fight under the Matchroom promotional banner. She's going to be facing the Dominican Republic's own Diana Vargas.
They chose a live body.
An aggressive fighter that packs a punch. More fights, more rounds in the bank, and certainly more knockouts than Skye Nicholson. Diana Vargas sports professional record of 18 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 12 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 19 professional bouts. To Skye Nicholson, who sports an unblemished record of 10 wins with no losses, no draws, 1 knockout, only 1 recorded knockout. We all know that Skye Nicholson, she's no knockout merchant. She's a finesse-fighting kind of fighter, and they're putting her in there with a live one. I half expected them to put her in there with Nina Menke.
A safer choice.
Nina Menke of Germany. Nina, who's been around the block, been in the circuit for years. She's won some fights. She's lost some fights. She's a southpaw like Skye's a southpaw, but she's not a puncher. I think she would have been a safe choice, whereas they're choosing to roll the dice.
Yeah.
You wonder why?
They're choosing to put her in there with a puncher.
And don't misunderstand me, I'm not complaining. This is an intriguing fight. As pure boxers like Skye, they don't handle pressure well. So I can only deduce that if they're choosing to put her in there with an aggressive opponent that has an aggressive style and has some power, it's because they want to get her ready for those kinds of fights while still mitigating the risks.
How's that?
Because on some level, Diana Vargas has power, even if her quality of competition is nothing to write home about, seemingly pedestrian, at least compared to Skye's.
She's got knockouts.
32 years old at 18-1, certainly not the oldest fighter, but not the youngest either, smack dab in the middle, with more fights and more rounds in the bank, more pro experience than Skye Nicholson, the champion, the defending champion. Diana's the challenger.
She suffered her first professional loss in June of last year, a unanimous decision loss to Vivian Rodriguez, but she has since rebounded off that loss in September of that same year, knocking out Jennifer Rodriguez and knocking out Gina Joseph earlier this year.
I've seen footage of Diana in action, and believe it or not, she's actually pretty good. There's form, there's function, and there's physique. Almost immediately, you can see where the power comes from. She's got big legs, big quads. Big quads make for big power, as that gives the fighter a solid base.
Makes for a stronger punch.
Though if she is able to regularly land those hard punches, it's because a lot of the girls that she's been matched with are out of their depth. They don't have the talent level that she has, let alone the talent level, defensive prowess of a Skye Nicholson. Thus, delivering those power shots on Skye will prove a lot more difficult for Diana than it has been in previous instances, because Skye's not going to just let herself get chin-checked, and she's not going to stand in one spot.
Pure boxers don't.
The pure boxer's bread and butter is all about movement and defense, fighting from a safe distance. Skye Nicholson has always had very generous physical dimensions for a featherweight. She's long, limber, and mobile. So what Skye Nicholson and her team figure is they're going to bull and matador this thing, because even if Diana Vargas has a decent-sized punch, they're not going to let her land it. They're going to move around, use the ring, walk her into punches, counter punches.
They're not going to sit in one spot. She's not going to sit there and trade with Diana. Diana's dangerous in the exchange.
It's the last thing you want to do with a fighter like this. They're relying on that to get those punches off.
You can't let them.
Skye Nicholson and her team are telling themselves is that even if Diana is a big puncher with more fights and more rounds in the bank and certainly more knockouts than Skye has, so long as she can't deliver that power, the power doesn't matter, because power don't matter if you can't land.
That's the strategy.
Skye's relying on her speed, her mobility, her agility, her angles, because she is a southpaw, whereas Diana is an orthodox fighter, to pot shots safely from the outside.
Out of range of Diana's power.
What Skye Nicholson's got to do is keep distance and maintain it, whereas what Diana has to do is close it as best as she can. She's got to put Skye under a lot of pressure, because Skye ain't been chin-checked yet.
She ain't really been hit.
And if the pure boxer has it their way, they won't get hit. That's what it's all about for them. Hit and not get hit.
Don't take any chances.
I have to admit, this is a better opponent choice than I was expecting. I was expecting someone a little bit more safe, because Skye Nicholson's rumored to be facing Raven Chapman later on this year. Now, a fight like this does ready her better for a Raven Chapman fight than somebody else would, somebody else could. But this is dangerous. There are perils in association with this thing, because if Diana gets in...
If she gets in with a clean one, Sky could go down. Sky could go out. She ain't really been chin-checked yet.
Talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches. Men's light heavyweight news. The ongoing situation involving the WBO, their interim title, Joshua Buatsi, Anthony Yarde, and now Willie Hutchinson. The WBO has ordered Joshua Buatsi to face Willie Hutchinson for their interim world title, with the pair having 10 days to negotiate before purse bids are ordered. They had originally ordered Buatsi to face Anthony Yarde, but Yarde's legal team informed the WBO that he would be withdrawing from the purse bid due to contractual issues with Queensberry. That's been going on for at least, 2 weeks now? Maybe a little longer?
That's the reason the Buatsi fight didn't get made.
Ben Shalom requested on Saturday that the WBO give them a 1 or 2 week extension to negotiate directly with Anthony Yarde, but after a request from Queensberry for Hutchinson to be considered instead of Anthony, the WBO accepted that request and therefore have ordered Buatsi versus Hutchinson.
So if you're wondering, why didn't Buatsi versus Yarde get made? That's why.
Anthony's going through some things with Queensberry. It looks like he's shooting for free agency, though I don't know why and to go where.
Boxer?
Maybe he wants to go to Boxer. Maybe they're whispering sweet nothings in his ear like they did to Lawrence Okoli and Joshua Buatsi. Maybe that's what it is. Anthony Yarde himself said, "As I said before, I am a free agent. Queensberry have now agreed in writing. The term of my previous promotional agreement has expired, so I am free to negotiate my future fights with any promoters, including Queensberry. I'm excited about the future big fights, even though he doesn't seem to be having any."
He says he's a free agent.
Queensberry says otherwise. Queensberry Promotions says, "We have seen the statement from Anthony Yarde today. Queensberry's legal advice is that Anthony Yarde still has a contractual obligation to Queensberry, an obligation which Queensberry expects to be honored."
My thoughts.
Queensberry have been good to Anthony Yarde. Even after he lost to Sergey Kovalev and lost to Lyndon Arthur, then lost again to Artur Beterbiev, they've stood by him. So for him to try and terminate this deal prematurely, at least according to them,
If he's still under contract, and he's trying to get out of that early, it's got to be because somebody offered him something he thinks is better.
enter Ben Shalom, who requested more time to negotiate with Anthony directly. So the situation with Anthony and Queensberry might be similar to the situation between Lawrence Okoli and Matchroom, where he was trying to get out of his existing Matchroom deal.
Matchroom said they still had a contract on him.
That went on for months, and some things were said, and eventually they cut him loose. He migrated over to Boxer, lost his WBO title.
Rebounded off that loss 2 weeks ago by winning a Bridgerweight title from Lukas Rozanski in Poland.
That's not the point. The point is, I get the sense that maybe the reason Anthony is trying to jump ship from Queensberry is so that he can migrate over to Boxer, because perhaps they've offered him something sizable, something he thinks is better than what he's got going on at Queensberry, so now he wants to leave.
We don't know if he can.
In the interim, the WBO have ordered Joshua Buatsi to fight Willie Hutchinson in Anthony Yarde's place, and I don't know if that fight is going to materialize, because I think Queensberry would like to host that fight just as much as Boxer would like to host that fight. So if push comes to shove,
Who's gonna cross the street?
because somebody has to, and Ben Shalom's fighters, Boxer's fighters, have fast developed a reputation for pulling out of purse bids, like how Richard Riakporhe pulled out of the Jai Opataya purse bid,
Yes.
how Fraser Clark was pulled out of
Yes.
the Fabio Wortley purse bid back when Matchroom was in the picture. They didn't make the fight between them until they were out of the picture. How Caroline Dubois was pulled out of that purse bid for a Beatrice Ferreira fight for what was a newly vacated title. Boxers' fighters have developed a reputation for pulling out of purse bids for fear that they'll lose the bid and the fighter will have to fight on a rival platform. So I feel like if push comes to shove, Ben will just withdraw Joshua Buatsi from this situation.
Think about it.
The order is only as important as the fighter's desire to win a WBO interim title. Personally, I don't think Joshua Buatsi's all that pressed for titles right now. Interim titles or full titles, we know who's got them.
Beef-all and better beef.
All the world titles are split between those two guys. No, I got the sense that Joshua Buatsi left Matchroom for Boxer because he didn't want to fight on the world stage. He wanted to stay domestic.
The most that he did since migrating over to Boxer was fight a domestic guy in Dan Aziz. Nothing against him, but he's not world level.
Joshua Buatsi's telling himself, what am I going to risk my unbeaten record for fighting a Dmitry Bivol or somebody like that when I can make the same or more money just staying domestic in what are more winnable fights?
And still lucrative.
You don't actually need a world title to be on the line to sell a Buatsi versus Yarde fight. That fight sells itself in the United Kingdom.
Behind the scenes, that might be what they're trying to do. The issue is we don't actually know if Anthony's a free agent. He says he is. Queensberry says otherwise.
And now you've got this order from the WBO hanging over your head. It would be terrible optics if Buatsi withdraws. You know, you already turned down a 7-figure payday and a world title opportunity at Dmitry Bivol from Matchroom. If you walk away from this, people are going to start asking themselves, what the hell does this guy want from his career?
The Willie Hutchinson fight is not a bad fight. They share a common opponent in Craig Richards. They both fought him. They both beat him. Now it's time for them to fight each other.
And I don't know if they're going to be honest with you. We'll see what develops because I don't have those answers. In men's heavyweight news broke earlier today that talks have already begun for a huge all-British heavyweight showdown between Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois, who I talked about in my previous video, and I told you that if Anthony has to choose between Daniel Dubois and Zhang, given the decorum, Daniel Dubois is the way to go. That's what's in keeping for a Matchroom versus Queensberry kind of situation.
Yes.
For a fight,
Yes.
a card set to take place on UK soil. It sells itself with Daniel Dubois' stock on the rise. His win over Jarrell Miller, his more recent win over then unbeaten Filip Hrgovic this past weekend. It's perfect.
Now, some people would prefer to see Anthony Joshua fight Zhang on the premise that they view him as being a more dangerous opponent than Daniel Dubois.
Because even though Zhang has been beaten before, you know, technically, Filip Hrgovic didn't really beat Zhang. And even if Joseph Parker did, he did it by the skin of his teeth.
Zhang's never been knocked out.
That is, he's never been knocked out as a professional. He was knocked out as an amateur by Anthony Joshua. They've got a score to settle with each other, and some would prefer to see Anthony fight Chang instead of Daniel. For me personally, I ain't got no preference because I think Anthony beats the both of those guys. Slight nuances aside for how he'd have to fight Chang versus how he'd have to fight Daniel, I'm all right with either.
I think the risks are about the same.
They're both big guys, strong guys. They pack a knockout punch. They're riding high. Not Daniel. Daniel's a lot younger and a lot fresher than Zhang. But Daniel, he's been knocked out. He's been knocked out 2 times before, whereas Zhang has never been knocked out. And Daniel, while he is younger and he's got momentum going, he's not as fundamentally sound as Zhang. That's why he ate so many right hands this weekend from Filip Hrgovic. And as I said in my previous video,
You may have been able to absorb those right hands from Filip Hrgovic because he ain't got Anthony Joshua's range of motion. He's a lot more robotic, and even though he's got some power, he ain't got no snap on those punches. Anthony does. He's actually got some speed. So you won't eat right hands from Anthony as easily as you ate right hands from Filip.
I got Anthony knocking him out, but it makes for a great fight. Though if Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois have already entered into negotiations, where does that leave Zhang? Because surely, after a win like this past weekend's win, knockout win over Deontay Wilder, which is all anybody's really talking about, surely he's earned himself a big fight.
Well, he might. Or at least, if nothing else, a big situation.
Zhang's next fight could be a homecoming fight in China. Frank Warren has revealed we're about to start negotiations with the people who approached us, and that would be a great homecoming for him.
Rumor has it that the metrics for Zhang's knockout win over Deontay Wilder in China are through the roof. China is not often thought of as a boxing market like, say, Japan.
When it comes to boxing, Japan is way more of a boxing market than China is. China don't produce that many boxers.
Nope.
But perhaps Zhang and all the success that he's having abroad outside of his native China might inspire a younger generation of Chinese fighters to take up the sport of boxing. You never know. It's a densely populated nation.
If they were to take an interest in the sport of boxing, they could become one of the strongest markets for it on the planet.
Seeing a familiar face, one of their own, against all odds, fighting abroad and succeeding, even if he isn't a world champion yet, even if it's not for a full alphabet title, Zhang doing as well as he's doing could inspire a younger generation of Chinese boxers to take up the sport.
Investors.
Like the ones interested in bringing his next fight to his native China to start developing fighters and opening up boxing gyms, developing fighters, developing the market.
It can happen, and he can be the catalyst.
Now, who should Zhang fight in a homecoming fight if it's not Anthony Joshua? And you have to remember that in a homecoming fight, it's not necessarily about the opponent. It's practically a showcase kind of situation to where you just want to be able to get out there and perform for the hometown crowd. So there's not a lot of emphasis on who it's going to be, but one name that almost immediately comes to mind is the name of Joseph Parker. No, Parker's not obligated to run it back with Zhang, and I'm sure there are other people Joseph Parker would like to fight.
He barely survived Zhilei Zhang.
Joseph Parker's one name that comes to mind. The name of Agit Kabayel is another, but once again, that's a risky fight. And for a homecoming fight, it doesn't necessarily need to be a risky one for you to sell it, because the occasion sells itself.
It's all in the name. Homecoming fight.
You know, given the recent trend of homecoming fights that went sideways for the hometown fighter, think about Giovanni Santillán in his recent homecoming fight against Brian Norman. That did not go as planned.
A few years ago, when Julian Williams had his homecoming fight after beating Jarrett Hurd, and when he beat Jarrett Hurd, that was actually Jarrett Hurd's homecoming fight.
The both of them lost in what were homecoming fights.
So you have to be careful.
Because a homecoming fight, in essence, is supposed to be a showcase fight for the hometown crowd to see the hometown fighter do what he does. But you don't want to match him too hard.
Careful now, don't hurt yourself.
Going to assume that because Chang is still with Frank Warren in Queensbury, they'd get the UK rights to the fight. Maybe Top Rank would get the US rights to the fight.
We'll see.